All right. Hello and welcome to the second annual New Jersey Youth Transitions Conference, Day 4. Today is Thursday. My name is April DePietro, and I represent the Camden County Partnership for Children on behalf of the YTC Planning Committee. We will place a registration form in the chat box for you to share your contact information so that we can share the recordings and resources with you from today's workshop. Please note, for those who are seeking continuing education credit, you are required to complete the form, as this is the contact method in which we will send you your proof of attendance. Today's workshop will be hosted via the same link you have joined with today. You can see the full schedule on our website, and I will share the agenda on the screen after the conclusion of today's workshop. The link that I'm going to place in the chat box is also going to have some handouts that Bill from the Department of Ed has shared with us. I'm going to share that right before he starts, and then I'm not going to share it again until the end of the presentation, as to not disrupt him during his presentation, okay? If you need anything, you can send me a private message. You can also submit questions to me, and Bill will take some breaks throughout the presentation to address questions. Our presenter today is Bill Freeman from the New Jersey Department of Education, who will present on the topic Transition from School to Adult Life, Regulations and Best Practices. Bill Freeman, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, April. I'm just going to get my screen shared here, get this presentation started. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so everyone should be seeing that title slide, Transition from School to Adult Life, Regulations and Best Practices. And as April said, my name is Bill Freeman, and I'm with the New Jersey Department of Education in the Office of Special Education. And I am the State Coordinator of Secondary Transition. So this is my passion. This is what I do day in, day out, is help folks to better prepare students with disabilities for adult life. So that's what this presentation is all about. I want to make sure that everyone that's participating today is able to, by the end of the presentation, to locate and describe the various transition components that are in a New Jersey IEP. I want folks to be able to know those factors that are associated with effective transition planning. And of course, I'm going to point your way to lots of great resources on the web, including our newly developed, newly revised transition toolkit that we have on the New Jersey Department of Education's website. So I'd like to start with my informal definition of transition planning. This is not the law. This is not in code. This is my way of explaining this to folks. And I think of transition planning as a formal process of long-range cooperative planning that will assist students with disabilities to successfully move from school into the adult world. And the formal process I'm talking about here is nothing other than the IEP, the Individualized Education Program process. There is no separate transition planning process. It's all within the IEP. And when I was a young man in graduate school learning about IEPs and how to develop IEPs, one of the things that I learned was that we had to have an annual IEP meeting at least once a year. Okay, so that led to a lot of folks thinking about IEPs as an annual event or something that defined what we would be doing for the next year, sort of in 12-month blocks. And when transition planning became part of the IEP, that sort of changed that mindset, because we could no longer think in just 1 year blocks of time. It forced us to think multi-year, long range. And so that's one of the huge changes when we include transition planning in IEPs. The other thing that I learned when I was in graduate school was how the IEP team was supposed to be this collaborative group of folks that got together and all worked on behalf of students with disabilities to help them move into a successful adult life. And over the years, you tell me, how's that going? You guys working together in a collaborative way? I hope so. It turns out that without that collaborative, cooperative process, transition to adult life really suffers. Kids suffer. And so I see that as absolutely essential. And I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. Now, if I were to alter this sentence with the removal of just any one word, that would drastically change what it means. That one word, I think, would have to be successfully. If we took out that word successfully, and we were simply having a formal process of long-range cooperative planning to assist students with disabilities to move from school into the adult world, question would be, so what? We're helping them move into the adult world. So what? Well, we need for our students to be successful. We want for our students to be successful. So the question becomes, how do we define success? And I think that you'll probably agree with me when I say that there isn't any one way to define success, that students may define success for themselves in different ways, right? For some students, if they don't get into the specific college that they applied for at first, they're not successful. Well, for other kids, getting a job in the career that they're interested in right out of high school, that's success for them. So every student might have a different idea, a different yardstick to measure success. So that's something we have to help kids figure out, what is success for them. Okay. And as I was saying a minute ago, collaboration is absolutely essential. I want to tell you a story that I have told for many years during this training, because I feel as though it encapsulates one of the core concepts of what makes transition possible and successful. Back when I was a young teacher, and I was a special ed teacher many years ago, and I was asked to start a vocational program for students with disabilities. And my idea of a vocational program for students with disabilities was to get them out into the community, working in jobs with the support of people like job coaches and people that could help them get to and from the job, and they give them what they needed to be successful, but get them out of the school building into real jobs. And so that's what we went out to do. And I was brand new in this school. And so I needed to find out who was the oldest student in the school, because that was the student I needed to focus on first. And it turned out that that young adult was turning 21, this young woman. She was a student on the autism spectrum, essentially nonverbal, fairly capable in terms of what she could do, but not so much academically. She was somebody who had kind of some obsessive compulsive behaviors, but she was well liked in school. And as I was getting to know this young woman, I learned that her parents had had a baby not that long ago. And when her parents were pregnant with this baby, they had concerns that when the baby was born, their older daughter might somehow hurt the baby. And so they talked to the Division of Developmental Disabilities, and they had this young woman placed residentially while she was still in high school so that they could have the baby and the baby would be safe. And that's what happened. This is a true story. So I learned that this young woman was living on the campus of the North Jersey Developmental Center, run by DDD at the time. That center is no longer in existence, but at the time it was this very large campus in North Jersey. And she was attending our school during the day. So I did what job developers need to do. I asked around, who are my contacts? Who do I know? And so I spoke to the different teachers on staff to see if anyone knew of any employers in the community that would be interested and willing to take on a student for a few hours a week, a few days a week, to have some job experience. And it turned out another teacher on staff, her family owned a hardware store that was just down the road from the school and not far from where this young woman was living at the North Jersey Developmental Center. Now, I wanted to tell you this other behavior that this young woman had. When she was in school one time, she got a hold of a pair of scissors and she gave herself a haircut. And the concern on the staff's side was that not that she would give herself bad haircuts, but that she might hurt herself with the scissors, or she might hurt other people with scissors. And so the rule became in the school as well as her residence that everyone had to keep scissors locked away. They couldn't leave them lying around where this young woman could get a hold of them. As you can imagine, when you deny something from somebody who has sort of obsessive compulsive behaviors, it might even strengthen that compulsion, right? So anyway, because we had a connection to this hardware store, that's where we took this young woman out for job experience. And I talked to the owners of the hardware store. They were very happy to have us come in with a student. They certainly knew about our school from their family member. And by the way, what's in a hardware store? Right? Maybe a whole aisle of sharp implements and scissors and other things. Well, it turned out that this young woman really loved the opportunity to go to this hardware store, and she was doing stocking work. She would take items out of boxes and put them on the shelf. She had to use a price gun, so we taught her how to use the price gun. She would get it right exactly in the spot it needed to go in and make sure everything on the shelf was all straight and neat the way it needed to be. It turned out that she was an excellent match for stocking at this hardware store, and she did not want to do anything to jeopardize her job. And so she never once went to grab the scissors or anything else sharp that she should not be touching. It's an indication of how you can sort of see somebody's motivation really helping to address some issues that might have been the case in another environment. Anyway, to make a long story shorter, the year went by and this young woman is doing great in this job. She's going a couple of hours a week, a few days a week. They're paying her minimum wage at the time. And so you can imagine this young woman doing this job, getting a paycheck. Sometimes when the van would take her at the end of her shift back to school, they'd stop at a store and she'd go in and buy whatever she wanted. So this was sort of a life-altering experience for this young woman to have that kind of control over her life, where she could purchase things and have a job, and really a major change in her life. So at the end of that school year, I got a call from the owners of the hardware store. And they said to me, you know, she's worked out really well, and we know she's about to graduate high school. And so when she does graduate, we'd like to offer her a full-time job. And I said, wow, that's awesome. And they said, oh, and by the way, you know, we're a family business, so everyone that works here full-time gets benefits, health coverage, vacation, etc. I said, wow, this is incredible. My first student graduates with a full-time job with benefits, health coverage, you name it, right? So I'm really excited. I get on the phone and I call up her parents and I explain how she's been offered this wonderful full-time job with health coverage in the works. And I have to tell you, I was way more excited than her parents were. Now, it's not that these were bad people, not at all. They hadn't really thought much about their young adult child having a job, and they were taking care of their young baby that they had had. And so that was, you know, employment for their older child wasn't something they had really thought much about. And so then I got on the phone and I asked to speak to the head person in charge of the vocational program at the North Jersey Developmental Center. And I spoke to this woman who explained to me that, you know, the adults on their campus have a place to go during the day, right on campus. And they have day activities and do other things. And I said, yeah, but she's been offered a full-time job, a real job in the community at the hardware store. And it includes benefits, health coverage, all the works. And I said, you know, she's really quite independent in this job at this point. She just needs a job coach to check up on her once in a while, follow along. And transportation 5 minutes down the road is really not very far. Well, that woman said to me, well, you know, we've been thinking about getting a job coach, but we don't currently have one. Thank you very much. And she hung up the phone. And as it turns out, my first student, lost her job because she couldn't get transportation. She couldn't get support after she graduated high school. That is a true story. And I learned a very difficult lesson as a teacher, as a professional. I learned that it's not enough for those of us who are professionals to find full-time jobs with benefits for our graduates. It's not enough if we do that in isolation. Now, what went wrong with this story? Well, was that young student that I was working with going to be a good self-advocate to say, I need a job coach, I need transportation? No, that was not her strength. It was not something she was able to do. Were her parents going to advocate for her to get those kind of supports? It didn't happen. Were the DDD staff or anyone at the North Jersey developmental staff advocating for her to have this job? No, they were not on board with that plan. So the lesson that we learned, and I have been repeating this story ever since, is that we must work as a team. We must collaborate with all the different players involved around students, parents, agency staff, employers, others. Everyone has to work together on behalf of students as a team. So fortunately for us, the law does support this to some extent. The law does say that when transition planning is included in IEPs, students must be invited to that IEP meeting. So that's a great step, is that students must be invited to those meetings. So common sense would dictate that those students should be prepared to participate in those IEP meetings as best they can. They should know something about what's going on in those meetings, what their role is. In some cases, students can lead their own IEP meetings with support. So that's all great in terms of collaboration. The bottom line here is that the more students, their parents, and others participate in the development and implementation of the IEP, the more effective transition planning can be. So when does transition planning begin? Now, I'm going to talk about the law, but also what's just common sense, what's something that I think many of us know about. Those of you that are parents, and myself included, I have 3 kids. We know, perhaps maybe even before we ever had kids, we might have had thoughts about what our children might grow up and become. We might have started planning for our children's lives as parents even before they were born. Certainly when kids are born and they are these little bundles of joy and we are happy to have them in our lives as parents, we again might think about, what will they grow up into? What will their future bring? So I think that it's fair to say that planning for adult life begins probably at the start of life, right? Really young kids start to begin preparing for adult life. When you think about preschool curriculum, if you're familiar with that, so much of preschool curriculum is getting along with others, thinking about what the world is outside, the larger community in general, the different players, the different occupations that people come across. So really, transition planning doesn't magically happen at any point in adolescence. It's something that I think is a lifelong process. However, the law does not acknowledge that lifelong process. It gives us specific points in time to address this in the IEP. So I'm going to focus on what that law says and give you all the details and specifics so that we can all be not only compliant with that law, but make sense of it, right? Okay, so the law says that some transition requirements must be addressed, must start to be addressed in the IEP that will be in place for the school year when the student turns age 14 or younger. And I love that the law says or younger, because there are some students that we need to start this younger because they have more needs. It's going to take longer to prepare them. So if you are in a family, you feel that your child needs to get started before they're turning 14, by all means, address transition sooner. There's an additional requirement that must be addressed in the IEP by the time the student turns age 15 or younger. And then other transition requirements must begin to be addressed in the IEP that will be in place for the school year when the student turns age 16 or younger. Again, that's always the option if people on the IEP team feel that the student needs that support. So the requirements for students turning age 14 or younger include, in the IEP, a statement of the student's strengths, interests, and preferences, identification of a course of study. And I'm going to go through each one of these in more detail so that you'll understand what these words mean. What is a course of study, right? Identification of related strategies and/or activities. consideration of consultation from other agencies, identification of a liaison to post-secondary resources, identifying interagency linkages and responsibilities, considering the need for pre-employment transition services, making sure that students as well as their parents are invited to IEP meetings. And we're inviting other agency folks, agency invitation to IEP meetings. To help everyone understand the timing of these requirements, I'm going to have this graphic throughout the presentation. What you're seeing is a number line of a student's age. So student is moving in this diagram from age 12 to 19 and beyond. And because this student is in school in these ages, we're going to superimpose school years and grades. And because this is a student with disabilities and has an IEP, we're going to have annual IEP meetings each year in school. And those are represented by those little donuts, circles. And we see that the student is turning 14 in the 8th grade here. And so we want to make sure that transition is addressed in that student's IEP for the start of that school year. And the start of the 8th grade is represented by that red line you see to the left of the 8th grade block. And those red lines are the date of the start of the school year, which is July 1. July 1st is the start of the school year, according to the law. And so transition must be in the IEP prior to July 1st of that 8th grade year, which means that we must address transition for the first time, not in the 8th grade, but rather in the 7th grade IEP meeting, because we can't wait until the 8th grade meeting, because 8th grade will be practically over by then. So that since the student is turning 14 in the 8th grade, we have to address transition in the prior IEP meeting, which is in the 7th grade, when the student is 13 years old and will be turning 14 the next school year. So we're going to have the statement of strengths, interests, and preferences, courses of study, and so on. Everything we've talked about so far. We're going to make sure students and parents are invited to that meeting. And since these arrows go to the right, all of these things are going to be repeated and updated each year at the IEP meeting. Agencies will be invited with parental consent to these IEP meetings. And when students are turning age 15 or younger, the law says beginning at least 3 years before the student reaches age 18, a statement that the student and the parent have been informed of the rights under this chapter, that's 6A14 in the state code, that will transfer to the student on reaching the age of majority. So this is letting folks know at least 3 years before the student hits that point, turns 18, that rights are going to transfer to the student. So to address that requirement 3 years before the student is turning 18, it means that we need to go all the way back to that 8th grade IEP meeting and begin addressing the statement of transfer of rights. And my suggestion is we constantly and repeatedly tell folks about this happening, because it is very counterintuitive, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. All right, so additional requirements for students turning 16 or younger are the age-appropriate transition assessments, measurable post-secondary goals, and statement of transition services. And so we see that this student is turning 16 in the 10th grade. And so we want to make sure that those additional requirements are in the IEP at the start of the 10th grade by July 1st. So we're going to start putting those in the IEP at the 9th grade meeting. And we're going to have measurable post-secondary goals, the student's measurable post-secondary goals, beginning when the student has just turned 15 in the 9th grade. We're going to have a statement of transition services. And in order for us to know what a student's measurable post-secondary goals are, the student's going to need some help to figure that out, right? These are teenagers. They don't necessarily know what they want when they get out of high school. What is their future going to hold? So there's a process called age-appropriate transition assessment that we need to get started well before that meeting in the 9th grade. Maybe we need to back up that process to the beginning of 9th grade or even earlier than that to start helping kids figure something out about what they want for their futures, right? That's what age-appropriate transition assessment's all about. So let's give ourselves some time prior to that 9th grade meeting so that we have an indication of what the students' measurable post-secondary goals are, and then we keep that going. It's an ongoing process. All right, before I get into the specifics of each one of these things, I'm going to pause to see if there are any questions.
There is nothing in the chat right now, but let's give folks just a moment. It is 9:35. If you have a particular question for Bill, please feel free to put it in the chat box now, and I will make sure that we read them out loud so he can answer them. If you are unfamiliar with Zoom, if you take the mouse and hover on the bottom, you'll get a series of options. There will be an icon that looks like a little speech bubble and it says chat. If you click it, it will open up the chat box. And then at the top, it will say to in a blue box, and you can select who your message goes to. You should have an option to send a message to me, to Amy, or to Bill directly.
Hi, April and Bill. It's Amy. I just got a message sent. It says, they believe that you were going into more detail, but could you please specify age-appropriate transition assessments?
Right. I have a section in this presentation specifically on age-appropriate transition assessment. So I'm going to wait till I get to that session to really dive into that. But that is absolutely a key process here. So we will get to that for sure.
Awesome. All right, I think we're good for now. Thank you for the pulse check. Oh, the hand is raised by Brenda.
Yeah, I'm sorry. The message was just misspelled, but I've been looking while we were having the discussion at my son's IEP, specifically in the section for transition. He's 15, and I keep all of his IEPs in a folder on my computer. So going back, none of that was done. Is it possible for me to request it now?
Yes, absolutely. Everything that I'm describing should be in the IEP. And so if it's not there, I would meet with the child study team. I would meet with your case manager and say, guys, we need to get this together. We can't wait. This is a requirement that we address this. And I'm be happy to help you offline with more specifics, but yes, this needs to be addressed every year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mhm.
AD has their hand up.
Hi, my question is this age appropriate assessment tests, are they like some kind of I mean, my son is 17 and I don't recall ever having heard of this. He is in what is called a multiple disabilities program. Is it a requirement or is it a good to have thing, or is it some school districts will do it? How does this work?
Yeah, so this is a requirement that age appropriate transition assessments be done. So when
Are
I
they
get to that,
also called by some
Yeah.
other names or something, or is it
Well,
that's
that's the language in the requirement. When I get into that section, I will give you examples of different tools that are used. But it's a process to help kids figure out what they're interested in, what they would like for their future, what they're good at. So we'll
and the
talk
child
more about
study
that.
team would do it?
It would be the school staff. So it could be child study team, it could be teachers, could be a bunch of folks, guidance counselors.
Okay, and it would be different from a functional vocational assessment, right?
That could be a piece of it.
Okay,
Yeah. So
okay, I'll
when I
wait
get
for
into
more
it, I'll
details.
describe it in more detail.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Amy, you have your hand up.
Yes, ma'am. I have a question my chat sent to me. It says, in this person's case, there is a statement of transition services. I'm sorry, in the statement of transition services is a link to perform care. Is that sufficient or appropriate, or should they be expecting more?
Well, if that's the only thing in the IEP, my guess is that they're probably not considering everything that needs to be addressed. So that would be a concern.
I also have a message here that says vocational assessments is something DVRS likes to have, especially with younger kids with no work experience.
Okay. We'll definitely get into that area some more as we get into this presentation. I'm sure you'll have more questions as we go along, so let's continue. All right, so this statement of strengths, interests, and preferences that should form the basis of transition planning is something that I think you'll agree teenagers need some help to sort of figure this out. From my experience and what I've seen in my students as well as my own children, they develop and refine their interests over time through the various activities that they go through while they're in school, or things they might be doing out of school, whether it's reading something, doing research, or if students are participating in community-based instruction where they get to go out and try different things or other authentic experiences. These are ways for kids to figure out what they like doing, what they're good at. My 3 kids went to high school. They're now in college, but when they were in high school, the high school had a program called Naviance in the guidance department. Naviance is a popular commercial product that many high schools had and still have. And so I asked my kids, have you guys used Naviance? given my career in special education and planning for adult life. And my kids said to me, "Dad, we don't use Naviance." And I said, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, it's not required. We don't get a grade for it." And I was like, "Yeah, you're right. You don't get a grade for it. You're not required to use it." So I think that it's probably pretty true when I say that kids need some structure, some assistance to begin this process of reflecting on their own lives, thinking about what their strengths and interests are, what their dreams and desires for their future is. It can't be left up to chance. I think that this requires us as professionals in schools to help kids figure something out and learn about themselves and learn about the world out there. So this has to be an active process. My suggestion for parents, for those of you that are parents, is that you create a list of your child's strengths, interests, and preferences regarding the things that you do with your child at home, and keep that list updated over time. And then you can share that list with your child's case manager and teachers, maybe a couple of times a year, the beginning of the school year and maybe again at the middle of the school year, because that list is going to keep growing. I expect it's going to change over time. And that's a great way for parents to have input into this information that's critical to set the stage for transition planning. So what I am displaying here is a state model IEP form. And the state model IEP was recently updated and revised. So the pages you're seeing are a reflection of what that updated model IEP is. Your district's IEP probably doesn't look exactly like this, but it hopefully will in the near future. And it most certainly should have this box, statement of student strengths, interests, and preferences. And it should contain as much detailed information about that student's strengths, interests, and preferences as is available. The richer the information, the better. Okay, next up is course of study. Let me talk about that. So there is this box in your child's IEP, courses of study, and it's supposed to include the specific course titles for the time period covered by the IEP, and then projections for the time beyond the life of this current IEP. So specific courses include general education courses, special education courses, other descriptions if the student is not in an academic program, but is in a functional skills program, more hands-on activities, then a description of what the student will be doing that year. And I have some examples here to show you. So this example is a student who is in the 10th grade currently, and their IEP is going to finish the 10th grade because they're having an IEP sort of in the middle of the year. So they're going to finish the 10th grade courses and then start the 11th grade during the life of this IEP. So that's the course of study for the life of this IEP. And then we've labeled the 12th grade as projected courses of study because it's beyond the life of this IEP. So you can see it's specific classes. It's not subject areas, but rather course titles, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, US History 2, Chemistry, etc. Here's another example. In this example, the IEP covers one full academic year. So it includes all the courses the student will have in the 11th grade. And in the case of students who are taking some electives, and the timing of the IEP meeting is such that it could be difficult for the school to figure out what specific elective the student will have in their schedule, because scheduling is typically done later in the school year, if not in the summer. There is this option to specify this sentence that I've highlighted here, and one of the following courses based upon scheduling: digital design, film and society, web design, or ceramics. We can list those options and say the student will have one of them based on scheduling when we're not sure yet what the schedule will be for the time period of this IEP. That's what we're talking specifically about. Now, for the 12th grade in this example, that's projected because it's beyond the life of this IEP. So we don't need a statement like that. We can just put the projected courses of study, and then we'll have an IEP meeting after this one to have the specific courses of study for 12th grade. And this is an example of an 18-year-old student who's in a curriculum that focuses on functional academics, community-based instruction, practical skill development. And so the courses of study describes activities and a progression of content that the student will be learning each year. So you can see in a narrative form content that the student will be covering, and it's not a repeat year after year, but rather a progression of content, gradually getting more advanced, more challenging. All right, next is related strategies and/or activities. So if a student will be turning 14 or 15 years old during the next school year, you want to consider some strategies and/or activities that are consistent with the student's strengths, interests, and preferences, and will assist the student to develop or attain post-secondary goals. So for example, some things to consider would be using tools like Naviance, njcan.org, explore-work.com. These are all web-based tools to help kids learn about their future, different college options, career options. Strategy might be to enroll in a career course that might be offered as an elective in the 10th grade, or sign up for participation in a basketball league, or explore participating in a community theater group, learn about person-centered planning, etc. Now, this box is up here in your child's IEP. It's there right now. And it should be used again for kids turning 14 or 15. For kids turning 16 and older, this box becomes redundant because those kinds of strategies and activities that we would put in this box, we're going to put in the section of the statement of transition services to come after this. And so we don't want to repeat stuff in two different places. So this box becomes basically redundant or not needed for those older kids. So my suggestion is, if the students will be turning 16 or older during the next school year, the needed transition-related activities and strategies should be placed in the 7 areas of the Statement of Transition Services. And we're going to have more information on this to follow. And the related strategies or activities box in the IEP would no longer be useful for these older students, as I've just said. So this box can be left blank. Teams are allowed to do that. Sometimes I'm told they feel nervous about leaving things blank. So if you need to put something in that box, you could say, please see the statement of transition services, because that's where that information would be for those older kids. All right, let's pause here for any questions before we move on.
Yes.
Hi, Bill, I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. You go
No,
first.
that's okay. No, you go ahead.
Thanks, April. This came to me while you were just presenting, Bill. Should transition planning courses of study selection list other courses of study considered but not taken or courses rejected by parents?
No, the courses of study should be the specific courses in the student's schedule for that year. So it's not what was considered and rejected or just other ideas. It's specific to what the student will be taking during that school year.
Okay. And the question that I have is, would you start listing the courses for 7th grade, especially if they turn 14 during that school year?
So yes, so anytime a student is turning 14, 13 turning 14, that would be the first time to start specifying the courses of study.
Okay.
Yep, so it's not based on grade, it's based on when they're turning 14.
Okay. And then the follow-up to that is, and how many years ahead should we mention if they are in middle school?
So that's a really good question, because as I said in the beginning of this presentation, we want multi-year planning. We want multi-year thinking going on. And so courses of study is a good example, because we want to specify the course of study for the life of this IEP, and that might just be one or half of one and half of the other. But let's project. Let's help everyone see what's a possibility for high school classes down the line. That's my recommendation, is to include those projections, make it a multi-year plan. And because you're going to have an IEP meeting at least once a year, you've got lots of opportunity to update those projections to actual courses.
Thank you, Bill.
Yep.
I don't have any other questions on my side. Amy, do you have any questions on yours?
No, I do not at this time.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Let's
Thank you, Bill.
Yep. Let's move on to considering consultation from other agencies. So consultation from other agencies, what I find is that when we talk about other agencies to school staff, very often their minds go right to referral, right to eligibility determination, because that's what agencies typically involve, right? Well, this is a stage before that. This is the precursor here. Consultation is the stage of getting information or advice from another agency. So we're not applying for eligibility here. We're not determining anything other than answering questions, getting information. So what is the Division of Disability Services? What is the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services? What is New Jersey Transit Access Link? If you don't know what those things are, let's get some answers. Let's get some information. So at the IEP meeting, there's this indication of, do you need information or advice? Do you need consultation from another agency? Yes or no? And if you need that information, you check off in the IEP that you need the information. Excuse me, specify where it's going to come from, what agency, and then you get that information after the IEP meeting. All right, so this is the box in the IEP. Information or advice needed from Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services and or other agencies. And as I said, there's a yes, no box here, so we can check off whether we need it or not, and then list the agency where that consultation will be coming from after the IEP meeting. So we don't need to invite people to the IEP meeting to get this consultation because we're just considering whether we need it at the IEP meeting. All right, identifying liaison to post-secondary resources. So this box in the IEP, and it's there now, should list my recommendation is you list the title of the school staff person who has the job to help kids connect or, make a referral when that's needed to post-secondary resources, other agencies. So that could be a transition coordinator, it could be a guidance counselor, it could be case manager. It's whose job it is to help students get connected to other agencies when that's needed. Next up is the statement of needed interagency linkages. So now we're at the point where we're considering, does the student need to be referred to another agency? Do they need to be referred to the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, DVRS, or the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired for those kids that are visually impaired or blind? For something called pre-employment transition services, PREETs. And if needed, these students, do they need to be referred for traditional vocational rehabilitation services? This is something we're going to consider for kids right when they're turning 14. Do they need PREETs? Do they need vocational rehabilitation services? So what are pre-employment transition services? These are 5 specific services as specified by a federal law known as the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, or WIOA. That law specifies that students with disabilities, and by the way, it's not just kids with IEPs, but kids with 504 plans or kids with just medical documentation of a disability, they can all get pre-employment transition services. They can get job exploration counseling if they need it. They can get work-based learning experiences if they need it. Counseling on opportunities for enrollment in post-secondary education programs, workplace readiness training, and instruction in self-advocacy. So as I said, DVRS or CBVI for kids who are connected to that agency are the vocational rehabilitation agencies in New Jersey that provide pre-employment transition services. One or more of these 5 activities specifically for kids turning 14 and up. And as you can imagine, there's coordination that is needed to provide these pre-employment transition services. For one thing, some of these services might have already been provided to students by their school. So, if the school has work-based learning experiences for their kids, they have kids going out and trying different jobs, then DVRS doesn't need to do that. They're not going to repeat what the school is doing. So if we're asking DVRS or CBVI to provide any one of these PREETs, it's going to be because these 2 criteria here, the student continues to have a need for that and is not expected to receive it from the school. And so DVRS and CBVI staff need to work with the school to figure out who's going to provide a particular service to make sure that there isn't duplication, there isn't unnecessary service going on. So there is in the new model IEP now a box labeled pre-employment transition services, and it lists the 5 services on the left side, has a checkbox, yes, no, does the student currently need this service? So we want to consider that each year at the IEP meeting. And then we can record previous dates the service was provided, so we can have sort of a running record of dates that these services were provided by either the school, Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, DVRS, or the New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, CBVI. And if any of these services are determined to be currently needed, the school should consult with DVRS or CBVI staff to determine who will be responsible for arranging and providing each needed service. What I highly recommend for school staff to do with their local DVRS office or CBVI, if necessary, is to work collaboratively to develop and use a protocol that specifies procedures for how the school will work with these agencies. Specific procedures of what will happen in a given time period, what will the school do, what will the agency do, and we have developed a sample protocol that we will be sending out to everyone so that they can kind of see what it could look like. And I think that would really go a long way to help that collaboration, that partnership between local school districts and these state agencies. So one of the things that would go in that protocol would be the criteria that should be used when determining who's responsible both for paying for these services and providing these services, fiscally and providing, one of the 5 PREETs. So the first criteria is the purpose of the service. Is it related more to an employment outcome or education? That is the service usually considered a special education or related service, such as transition planning necessary for the provision of a free, appropriate public education? Next criteria is it customary? Is the service one that the school customarily provides under Part B of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act? For example, if the school ordinarily provides job exploration counseling or work experiences to its eligible students with disabilities, the mere fact that those services are now authorized under the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, as PREETs, does not mean that the school should cease providing them and refer those students to the VR program. However, if summer work experiences are not customarily provided by a school, DVRS or CBVI and the school may collaborate to coordinate and provide summer work experiences for the student. And the third criteria has to do with eligibility, because students with disabilities who receive accommodations under Section 504 can get PREETs, but they're not eligible to receive special education and related services, including transition services under IDA. So therefore, these students would get PREETs from the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation or the Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired. So those are the 3 criteria to use when figuring out who's going to do what when it comes to PREETs. All right, so to get students these services, these pre-employment transition services, as I said before, 3 different types of students who are in special education, they're eligible for special education, students who are not eligible for special education but have accommodations under Section 504, they can get PREETs, as well as students who have a documented disability. All of these students have disabilities and they're considered, the law says, potentially eligible. What that means is that they don't need to apply for eligibility with these agencies to get pre-ets. They are considered potentially eligible and therefore can just show that IEP, show that 504 plan, show that documented disability from a doctor. That's all they need, and they can get pre-ets. It's very straightforward, simplified process to access these services. It just requires a referral. So that referral form can be filled out. You can find it on the web for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And for the Commission for the Blind, the chances are pretty good that students who are blind, deafblind, or visually impaired, they might have a teacher of the blind or visually impaired already working with them. So they can talk to that person about a referral. And if they're not working with that teacher, somebody can contact a regional CBVI office, which is listed on their website. All right, before I move on, does anyone have any questions about pre-employment transition services and any of that process?
Hey, Bill, it's Amy. I have a couple questions in the chat for you. One is, how does a 14-year-old homeschooled child with diagnosis of autism get referrals for vocational rehabilitation services and pre-employment services?
Yeah, so excellent question, right? Even homeschooled students can access these services. The form to refer them to DVR is right on their website that I listed. So as a parent, you can help your child fill out that form and get them those services.
I have a question as well. It says a documented disability for pre-ets. Would that include a diagnosis of ADHD?
Great question. Yes, I love it. So the documentation of a disability and for the purposes of vocational rehabilitation, the disability has to somehow provide an impediment or a reason for difficulty obtaining employment or maintaining employment. If the disability does, in a family's opinion, have some impact on employment, then I would suggest that they use that to get pre-employment transition services. And the agency would only verify any further eligibility requirement if the student were to apply for the traditional VR services. So at the stage of pre-ets, it's just documentation of a disability. So that's as far as it goes.
Thank you, Bill.
Yeah.
I have another question here in the chat, Bill. When you just went over pre-ets, is that a mandatory section in the IEP now?
So that's a great question. It is in the state model IEP form now. What it is a mandatory offering of services for kids with disabilities. So because this federal law, the WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, mandates that the VR program, in our case, DVRS and CBVI, it mandates that they offer these services to all kids with disabilities. So that's why we want everyone to consider it as part of the IEP and document it in the IEP as making sure that it's all done in a proper way.
Is there a list of agencies that provide pre-ets services for the state, or at least by county?
Great question. I would check with those agencies, contact your local DVRS person who's assigned to your school and ask them that question, because I think if they don't have that yet, that would be an excellent suggestion.
Because to my knowledge, I only know of one agency. They do service the entire state, but I was just curious if there was a list of others, because, you know, if families wanted to select what agency they wanted to provide that service. And it's at
Right.
no cost to the family, correct?
Correct, right.
Okay.
There's no cost to the family or the individual. Yeah, no, I know there's definitely more than one agency. There's a lot of agencies out there that are doing this. I don't know if there is a list of them yet available, but that would be a great thing to ask for.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I have a question here. What constitutes offering of pre-ETS services? Does a family need to formally decline receiving these services for DVRS or CBVI not to provide it, since it is mandatory for it to be provided?
So the mandatory part is the offering of those services, the consideration of those services. They don't have to be provided to kids that don't need them. They're simply being offered to all students with disabilities. If they need them, they can access them, and not just need them, but want them.
Mm,
Nobody's forcing these services on kids,
okay.
right? So yes, you have to need the service and want the service to get the service.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm. All right, can we move on?
Sounds good. I don't have any other questions in my chat.
All right. So, so in addition to considering the need for pre-employment transition services, we want to also, in this IEP process, consider if the student should be referred to other agencies for an eligibility determination to receive services from another agency, whether while they're in school currently or in the future when they're out of school, out of high school. So all of these different agencies have eligibility processes to get into their system for those more intensive services beyond pre-employment transition services. So there's the Children's System of Care, or very often thought of as Perform Care, which is the contractor that administers that program for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities under the age of 21. And then there's the Division of Developmental Disabilities for individuals over the age of 21. We want to connect them before they hit that point. So starting at age 18, we're going to start that referral process to get eligible for DDD. As I mentioned, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services also provides, in addition to pre-ETS, they provide traditional VR services starting with students while they're in school. So if in addition to the school services, a student needs vocational rehabilitation services that go beyond pre-ETS, they can apply for eligibility and get those services. Same thing goes for something like Access Link, New Jersey Transit's paratransit system, or the county paratransit system. Kids can be made eligible for those kinds of things so they can start navigating the community and getting around if they're not going to learn how to drive. Other services, depending on the needs of students, other agencies, including the federal agency like the Social Security Administration. And I'm so pleased to see that the conference this week has included representation from a lot of these different agencies. And I think it's been a great opportunity to learn more about these specific agencies and their services and how kids can access them. If you need some help in figuring out what agencies might be appropriate for your child or for a student, the Division of Disability Services offers an information and referral line through this toll-free number. Anybody can call this number, 888-285-3036. And you get to speak with a person about your child's situation, and they can recommend what agencies might be helpful or appropriate to meet the needs of your child. They also offer this publication. It's available on their website listed here. The New Jersey Resources book. It's available in English, Spanish, as well as an audio version from their website. It's kind of the yellow pages of disability services throughout New Jersey. So what I tell professionals about this book is that it's a great resource, certainly, to have on your shelf, but it's not enough. Because as a professional, you're going to be making referrals for kids over and over again. And so you need to have a relationship with the person at the other end of the phone. You need to be calling somebody who knows you and you know them, because that's what's going to help our kids get services, right? That relationship, that's what's key. So yeah, this is a good resource, but for professionals, you've got to go beyond that. You need to know the person you're calling. All right, so in the IEP, there is this box statement of needed interagency linkages and school district responsibilities. It should list what agency the student will be referred to, what the school district will do to help that happen, and what student and parents should be doing to make that happen as well. Next up is the student and parent invitation to the IEP meeting. At this point, I just ask folks in schools about the student invitation, making sure that they are sending a student invitation directly to the student, not in an envelope to the parent. That wouldn't be to the student. It does not even need to be mailed. It could be hand delivered, but the student needs to get their own invitation. That's the bottom line here. It's a requirement, as well as parents getting their own invitation, right? Two individuals getting invitations. Next up is with parental consent, agency invitation to IEP meetings. So if an agency such as the Commission for the Blind or Division of Vocational Rehabilitation Services, or maybe a supportive employment provider, is likely to provide transition services, for example, PREETs, to the student prior to graduation from high school, the school must obtain written consent from a parent or the adult student to invite that agency to the IEP meeting. So it must be written consent with a signature from parent, guardian, or adult student. If a parent wants the school to invite an agency likely to provide transition services to the IEP meeting, then a parent must sign that written consent form and return it to the school. Any questions before I move on?
Yes, I have one here in the chat. It says, what happens with referrals to DDD or any other agencies now that students can get an extra year in school-based on S3434?
Great question. Yeah. So my understanding is that students can begin to get DDD services as soon as they're turning 21. So if they remain enrolled in high school for purposes of helping them recover time lost during COVID, and that's what S34, S34 is talking about. It's that extra time that students might be getting because of what happened during COVID. If they turn 21, the Division of Developmental Disabilities can start providing services. That's what they've told me. And so they're going to look carefully at the student's school program because the student is still in school at that point. They don't want to step on the toes of educators, right? They don't want to duplicate what the school is doing. So they're going to look at that program and see what other additional services they can provide that the school isn't providing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. No other questions?
One more just came in. Does
Okay.
DDD provide social activities?
I don't work for DDD, but it's my understanding that DDD does look at the entire individual and does provide various opportunities to help that individual live a fulfilled adult life. And so I do imagine it does include things related to social activities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Amy, did you have any questions or no?
No, I had a question about DDD as well. I just answered that individual privately pertaining to that answer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Back to you, Bill.
All right. Let's talk about the statement on transfer of rights. So beginning when the student has turned 14 in the 8th grade in my example here, we're going to start telling everyone about this transfer of rights that's going to happen when the student turns 18. And the issue, as you can imagine, is that this is really counterintuitive for parents. I have to tell you a story of when, prior to my work here at the Department of Education, I ran an adult agency that provided supported employment for mostly young adults with disabilities to help them find employment in the community. And so as the director of this agency, I would attend the intake appointments of all the new people entering our agency services. And so we would typically go to the individual's home and we would sit around a table, sometimes in the kitchen, sometimes in the living room, and we would fill out an intake form to help us get to know the student, get to know the situation, and how we're going to work together. And at the end of that intake form, there was a place for a signature. And in every intake appointment I ever went to, and it was a lot of intake appointments, the parents who was sitting around the table would say, "Give that to me, I'll sign it." And I would have to turn to the parent and say, "Who's the guardian?" And the parent would look at me like I had two heads. "What do you mean, guardian?" "I'm the parent. Can't you see my child has a disability, lives in my house?" Yes, so that brought up the conversation about, well, when your child turned 18, they became their own guardian by the law. No process was needed. It just happens, right? It's automatic. And so therefore your child now can sign for themselves, has that ability, has that right. So parents don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to them. It's pretty counterintuitive. So I think this is a really good thing for the requirements to say that we have to help families think about this well before it happens, at least 3 years before it's going to happen. Let's start discussing, what does this mean, transfer of rights? What are the implications for my child? It brings up some pretty complicated and difficult conversations potentially regarding the need for help for that young person. Do we need to think about things like supported decision-making or other forms of guardianship or other alternatives? And we need to consult attorneys. We need to figure out what to do sometimes. And so this is the kind of thing that we want to give ourselves time to manage and figure out. So for more information about supported decision-making and issues like guardianship, there's some new resources out. We have now a brochure that was put together by 3 different state agencies. It's on our website. There's also the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making, and the ACLU has a publication, How to Make a Supported Decision-Making Agreement. And you can download that PDF as well. All right, now we're going to talk about age-appropriate transition assessments. So this is what we were talking about earlier during the questions period. Age-appropriate transition assessment. We're given this definition by the Division on Career Development and Transition of the Council for Exceptional Children, the CEC. They say that this transition assessment is an ongoing process of collecting information on the student's strengths, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. What I like about this definition is it acknowledges that it's an ongoing process. This isn't the administration of a tool or a one-time deal of any kind. This is an ongoing process. These are teenagers we're talking about, right? So things are going to change over time. We need to have this process continue throughout their education. We're going to collect information. What does the student like? What are they good at? What are they interested in? And that's going to help us figure out something about what they want for their future. So we're trying to identify, as I said, interests and preferences, family preferences for the student, things like self-determination, knowledge and skills, cognitive academic strengths, community participation, community living skills, vocational skills, social communication skills. It's pretty broad range, as you can see. It's kind of trying to really get as much information as possible to help a student and family plan for the future. So as you can imagine, this information can come from lots of different people, right? It can come directly from a student who's capable of sharing that information. It could come from parents and other family members who know the student well, relatives, friends of the student that know the student real well, the teachers that know that student, any therapist the student has, or job coaches, guidance staff or other school administrators, child study team members, case managers may know lots of information. If the student is working, their coworkers or employers might know some key information about strengths, interests, and preferences. And just other community members that know the student, neighbors or people the student interacts with in the community. Information can come from all these different folks, right? And the implementation issue for school staff who need to manage this information and collect it is, as you can see, it can be easily lost. How do schools manage the information so that it can be used effectively for transition planning in the IEP? It's coming from all these different places. How can they not let it slip through the cracks, right? So what I've suggested is that schools create a physical or virtual file, central file for every student with an IEP, and that they have transition assessment placed in that file. And then they institute procedures across all different school departments and let everybody know that when information is generated about a student's strengths, interests, and preferences, regardless of who in the building, who within the school system, that they place copies of that information into the student's central file on an ongoing basis. So it becomes a portfolio that keeps growing and gaining information over time. And that satisfies the requirement not just of collecting this information, but using this information for the IEP planning process. Now, I work for the State Department of Education, and I do trainings like this one on transition. I don't do monitoring. It's not one of my activities, but I know the people who do. I know the special ed monitors. They're nice folks. They work in my office. And so I talk to them and I say, what issue do you guys find the most non-compliant within the area of transition? When they go out and they monitor transition, what are they seeing over and over again the most as non-compliant? And the answer they gave me, and it's still true, failure to document the provision of age-appropriate transition assessments. Now, I don't think necessarily that this means that schools weren't doing transition assessment. More likely, they were doing it and not documenting it. Because transition assessment includes lots of different tools and methods. The key here is making sure that schools have documentation of it, because that's the requirement, it must be documented. So a couple of places for schools to document it. They can put it in the IEP. There's now a box in the new model IEP for documenting transition assessment. They don't have to put it in the IEP though. They could just put it in the student's file. As we discussed, they could have a portfolio of transition assessment information that would include the details of what was done, dates administered, and a summary of the results. So this is the box in the new model IEP for age-appropriate transition assessment information. Hopefully that will start appearing in everyone's IEP. So just a little bit more details about what transition assessment is. There are formal tools, standardized instruments that have validity and reliability data that must be typically done by professionals who have the qualifications to administer those tools. And then there are informal tools, subjective tools that can be done more on an informal basis. They're not normed. They don't have that same validity or reliability information. However, they can be very helpful and are best when used on an ongoing basis by lots of different folks, multiple people. So formal assessments include things like intelligence tests, aptitude, achievement tests, interest assessments, personality tests, and so on. Informal assessments include interviews, questionnaires with the student, direct observations, anecdotal records, situational assessments where kids get to try stuff and we observe what they can do, what they like to do. Curriculum-based assessments, interest inventories. There's a vocational profile on our website that can be filled out. Things like transition planning inventories. These are all examples of ways to collect this information. Another great way to gather information about students for the purposes of planning for the future is through person-centered planning. And we do have a project that we work collaboratively with the Boggs Center at Rutgers University, person-centered approaches in schools and transition, the PCAST project. So if you're interested in person-centered planning for your child, you can check out the training that's available, and it's available for school staff throughout the state, as well as more intensively for cohort schools. In terms of choosing assessments for students, it's important to acknowledge that one size does not fit every student. You can't just have a tool that's good for everybody, despite what the people who market these tools might suggest. Chances are that you can't have a tool given the diverse nature of kids with disabilities, right? We've got kids all along the spectrum of support needs. And so we can't just think in terms of a computer-based tool for all kids or a paper and pencil tool for all kids or anything in between, right? We need a bunch of different tools. As educators, we need to fill our toolbox with lots of different tools. So you can find listing of different ideas for transition assessment a couple of places. This one has been around a while, but it still has lots of great ideas. This one was put together by the state of Connecticut. They had a transition task force, and they put together this resource manual back in 2008. You can download that from the web. There are lots of examples of other tools on our New Jersey Transition Toolkit, which is on our website right now. There's a tab called Conducting Transition Assessments, and you can download different resources as well as a sample of free online career interest inventories. All right, let's pause there. Any questions about transition assessment?
I've got a question here for you in the chat, Bill. It says, I am a transition coordinator at an out-of-district placement. Do you have any transition assessments that may be appropriate? We do have data on all post-secondary goals.
Right. So what I would recommend is that you check out the resources that I've just mentioned to find listings of different tools and resources. I can tell you from my experience as an educator, as a special educator, many of the students that I worked with were nonverbal, needed a lot of support. And so to help them figure out what they liked and what they were good at, we had to give them opportunities to try stuff. And so a lot of our assessment was during the school year, we would collect information on what kids like to do, what they were good at, their performance data. So it was much more of a situational assessment or a curriculum-based assessment for kids that are need support needs, complex support needs, or are not able to engage directly in a process like NJCAN or some other web-based tool.
I see AD has their hand up.
Hi, I have a question. You just mentioned about the person-centered planning, and my son is 17, so I got that requested that of my school last year, and we filled up the forms, and I had some family members fill in, and we have all that. Now that information has been put in the IEP, but my question is, shouldn't there be a link as in whatever we have figured out from that in the statement of appropriate measurable the post-secondary goals and transition services?
So the way the post-secondary goals should be constructed is they should be based on the information collected as part of transition assessment. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, so I will read you out like in this, I'm not going to read his name or anything, but like for post-secondary education, it says after graduation, students' goal is to attend a training program to improve self-care, education, and vocational skills. So would that be enough? I mean, shouldn't that then have more details?
Well, I'm going to get into measurable post-secondary goals as my next topic. So if you can hang on with that question, I will give you some examples of what that should look like.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Bill. I don't have any other questions in the chat on my end.
Okay. So let's talk about measurable post-secondary goals. This, as we can see in this graphic, starts when kids are going to be turning 16. In my example here, it's at that IEP meeting in the 9th grade. And this is a quote from the Part B regulations of IDEA. It says post-secondary goals are generally understood to refer to those goals that a child hopes to achieve after leaving secondary school, high school. So I like that, and it says it's what the child hopes to achieve after leaving secondary school. So here are some examples. After graduating high school, Sean will enroll in a 3-month training course for computer repair. After graduating high school, Sue will enroll in Montclair State University to prepare for the health sciences field. After high school, Devin will attend the Career and Community Studies program at the College of New Jersey. After graduating high school, Jose will obtain part-time work in supported employment. After graduating high school at age 21, Ben will live in a DDD-funded supported apartment. There is this box that should be in your child's IEP, appropriate measurable post-secondary goals. There are 4 areas that should appear there: training, education, employment, and independent living. Students do not need to have all 4 filled out. However, they may not have goals in all 4 areas. So the thing to do is think about, does the school have a desire for training when they get out of high school? Do they have a desire for post-secondary education, college, 2 or 4-year college when they get out of high school? Do they have a desire for employment directly out of high school? Answer those questions and think about, does the student have independent living goals for their future when they get out of high school, if that's appropriate? So that's what transition assessment is going to help students figure out. What is their desire? What do they hope to achieve when they get out of high school? And once they have those post-secondary goals, and in the handouts, I've given you a page of examples of post-secondary goals, so you just have more examples of what I've just gone over. They have the statement of transition services starting in the 9th grade in this example, or when they're turning 16, and then updated each year. What I'm recommending here is that in preparation for the next IEP meeting, school staff, parents, and everybody should collaborate, all the IEP team members, to select transition services or activities and strategies that will assist the student to meet his or her post-secondary goals. Activities and strategies can and should be planned for multiple years. Remember, this is a multi-year plan, with responsibilities for implementation shared among all IEP team members, right? The best plan, from my point of view, is when everybody is supporting the student, not just the school, not just the family. Everybody's working together, helping the student achieve their goals for after high school. So you're going to consider activity strategies in the following 7 areas: instruction, related services, community experiences, employment, adult living objectives, daily living skills, and functional vocational evaluation. So you would want to consider each one of these areas, and the student may or may not need activities or strategies in any one of these areas, right? So we want to consider them and put them in the IEP if they're needed, not just for this year, but projecting activities and strategies for the next year or the year after that, make it multi-year. And we want people to take responsibility, right? Things like meeting, visiting, organizing, creating, examining, developing, conducting. In the handouts, you've got pages and pages of examples of activities and strategies to consider for each one of these 7 areas. So the important thing here is to make sure you consider, does my child need any strategies or activities in each of the 7 areas? So some examples, in addition to the ones in your packet: complete and submit applications to Bergen Community College or Fairleigh Dickinson University, or whatever the student wants to apply to go to college. Complete and submit the FAFSA for tuition assistance. Explore community transportation options on the web at the New Jersey Transit site. Visit and learn about youth volunteer program at the hospital. So everyone's IEP for kids turning 16 and older should have this section: coordinated set of activity strategies that prepare the student for the measurable post-secondary goals. So you'll see those activity strategies should be listed in each one of the boxes as needed by the student. The expected date of implementation for each activity, and the recommendation is to specify things like fall semester, spring semester, and the year that it's needed, whether it's this year or next year or the year after, so on. And then the person or the agency who's going to arrange or provide that service for each one of the activities. And you're going to consider instruction, related services, community experiences, employment, adult living, daily living, functional vocational evaluation. As you can imagine, if a student is headed to college, they may not need a functional vocational evaluation, right? Because functional implies hands-on, and that student has used Naviance, they've used NJCAN, maybe they've used computer-based tools. They have an idea of what they want to study in college. They don't feel the need to have a hands-on vocational evaluation. That's okay. We don't need to have things in each one of these boxes. It's depending on what the student needs. The box for related services is often misunderstood. Just for clarity purposes, this is not a repeat of the student's current related services that are indicated elsewhere in the IEP, right? The question here is, will the student need a related service such as transportation, counseling, etc., after graduating high school? And if so, then we can put strategies or activities in this box of the IEP that we can implement during high school that will prepare the student to receive those needed related services after graduating high school. So maybe learning about transportation services or being made eligible for Access Link, that kind of thing could go in this box. So we want, as I said, we want IEP teams to consider each area. And I said, if the student does not need any one of the 7 areas, then that box in the IEP may be left blank. That's perfectly okay. However, I know sometimes people get nervous about leaving boxes blank, or they're told they're not allowed to do that. Then you can put in the phrase something like considered not needed, because that's what you've done. You've considered it and decided it's not needed. So we want the IEP to identify who's going to be responsible for each activity, not just for each box, but rather each specific activity, and when it will be done. As I said, fall, spring, and the year. Remember, collaboration is essential. It's key. Each member of this team should take responsibility for helping the student move to their future that they want. This requires a multi-year long-range plan, so this is the place to make it happen. This is the action plan for transition planning. Here's an example. This student wants to go to college, and so for instruction, preparing for post-secondary education training, they're going to learn about Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act in the fall of 2023, and the student and the teacher are going to work together on that. I'm going to enroll an SAT prep course in the fall of 2024, and the student and the parent are going to work on that one. Visit college campuses and meet with student support services. They'll do that, the student and the parent. Learn about processes for accessing apartments for rent. Student and the teacher are going to work on that one. Complete and submit applications to Rutgers and Rowan. Student and guidance counselor are going to work on that one. Complete and submit the FAFSA for tuition assistance. The student and parent will do the FAFSA form. So hopefully this looks like a reasonable plan for you. If that student's goal is to head to college, I think it should work out good, right? All right, so in one of your handouts, you've got this checklist for transition components in the IEP. If you're a case manager working with students with disabilities, then you can go through this checklist to make sure you're prepared for IEP meetings, right? Documentation of the student's strengths, interests, and preferences, right? That's the first step here. Identification of the course of study for the time period covered by the IEP and future projections. Identification of related strategies and activities for those kids turning 14 and 15. Consideration of consultation from other agencies. That consultation, remember, is information and advice that those agency staff can give us. Information, identification of the liaison to post-secondary resources, who's going to make those referrals to other agencies when needed. Consider the need for pre-employment transition services or PREETs. Identifying needed interagency linkages when eligibility determination is needed. And for the older students turning 16 and older, you should also have identification of the students' measurable post-secondary goals, documentation of age-appropriate transition assessments, and identification of the transition services, the coordinated set of activity strategies across the 7 areas that we just discussed. You have my phone number, my email address, our website here. I look forward to helping you further. Should you need that help, contact me. You know how to do that now. I'm going to stop sharing. You have all these slides in the handout, so you don't need to write down any of the stuff if you get those handouts. You stop that, and I'm going to put this in the chat if I can. There we go. Oh, April did it. Great. Okay.
Teamwork.
All right. Excellent.
There is a message here that says, thank you, very helpful. I believe we had one other question. It says, as a VR counselor, if we notice the IEPs do not contain any of this type of information in the student's IEP for a college student, would it be appropriate to indicate it should be incorporated?
Yes. So in collaboration with the school staff, and hopefully you have that collaborative relationship, I would mention to them that you heard from Bill Freeman at the State Department of Education that there are certain pieces missing from this IEP. And so maybe you want to give Bill a call and he can help you fill that out.
Looks like Amy has her hand up. That might be from before.
Sorry, I didn't unmute. No, there's some questions in my chat. First one is, can you please provide a little more info about the NJCAN assessment you referenced? Where can we find it and who administers it?
Okay, great question. Yeah, njcan.org, njcan.org. That is a state-sponsored tool on the web to help individuals plan for their futures. It's a terrific tool. It's free for all New Jersey residents, so it doesn't cost anything to anyone living in New Jersey to use it. School staff can get an account on NJCAN for their students in their program. I highly recommend using NJCAN. It's a terrific tool.
Thanks, Bill. Next question looks to be my last in my chat is, our school's IEP format does not have a goals section, but does have a post-secondary training section. Should it also have a goals section?
Well, everything that I've shown you today is a requirement. So yes, it should have everything you've seen in this presentation. Everything in the state model IEP is a requirement. So if you follow the state model IEP, you'll be in good shape. I do plan to attend the Q&A on Friday. So if anyone has other questions, you can reach me then tomorrow on during the Q&A, as well as just send me an email or give me a call.
Thank you, Bill. That's going to be awesome. I'm super excited about the Q&A on Friday.
I know this was a lot of information, so you guys need time to digest. But when you have questions, you know how to reach me.
And for everyone in the room, just so you know, the workshops this entire week have been recorded. They will be uploaded to the conference website sometime in November, so stay tuned for that. We've also been streaming live on Facebook, so anyone can just go to the conference Facebook page and take a look at any of the pre-recordeds that have been uploaded there as well. We have a comment in the box that says that folks have been watching them at nighttime on Facebook, which is awesome. Someone said, thanks, this has been so helpful. That's the
Great.
goal.
All right.
Yeah, excellent.
Well, have
All
a
right.
great day, everyone.
Yeah, I'm going to do just our closing script for those that may have come in and missed the opening script. That concludes our workshop today with Bill Freeman from the New Jersey Department of Education. Thank you, Bill, for presenting and sharing your knowledge and resources today. The workshop recordings will be made available on our website in November, as I said. For those in need of proof of attendance or for continuing education credits, you will receive an email soon with your certificate. It is up to your employer to accept this as proof of continuing education. You will not receive your certificate if you did not register using the form shared today. I do know that a couple folks were unable to click that link. We have you written down. We will make sure that we send you that via email, so don't worry. We have everybody who participated in all of the workshops so far. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording now. And Bill, it was a pleasure. This is always a fantastic workshop each year. So we really appreciate it. We look forward to having you collaborate with us again next year. And of course, on Friday for the Q&A.
My pleasure. Thank you.